Okay, so here we have our pendulum model, which is a simple model made up of 3 pieces of geometry, which I named already: pendulum base geo, pendulum rope geo, and pendulum ball geo. So we're going to create a simple FK rig, forward kinematics rig, made up of joints and FK controls to control this pendulum. So first I'm going to create a joint chain that will be skinned or bound to the rope geo and the ball geo, and will deform this part of the pendulum. So I'll start off in the front view, and just to make the placement of the joints a bit easier, I'm going to turn on shading X-ray and shading wireframe unshaded. Alright, so if I look here, I can actually see where I have put more divisions here. This is actually where I will put the joints. Right, so I've given more divisions to where the joints will be, to allow for more detailed deformation when the joint bends. Right, okay, so let's get our create joints tool under the rigging menu, skeleton, create joints. Alright, and I'm just going to snap some joints in place here, starting from the top and going towards the end there. So if I hold on X, turns on grid snapping, and I can just click and snap one there, and now the next one I'm going to snap right there. So they're roughly 3 units down, and I see I have another part here where I have more divisions, so I'm going to snap one right there, and finally one more right down to where the ball is here, and press enter. Alright, so there I have my joint chain. So now I just want to rename these joints. Right, I don't want to leave them with these default names, so I'm going to use the naming convention pendulum underscore 01. This is the first joint. JNT. And before I press enter, I'm actually going to go Control A here, Control C to copy that name, press enter, then I can just press the down arrow key on the keyboard to go to the next joint in the hierarchy. I'm going to click on that name and paste in the name of the previous joint, and I'm just changing the 1 to a 2. Enter, down. Alright, now I'm on joint 3. I'm going to paste in that one again and change the 1 to a 3 this time. And go down to the last joint and paste and change the 1 to a 4 this time and press enter. Right, so now all of my joints are named properly there. Okay, so now we're ready to bind the rope geo and the ball geo to the joint chain here. So what you might notice is, if I drag across here and select, I'm just selecting the joints. So this is something in Maya where joints actually take precedence over geometry. So if you have a joint inside your geometry and you drag across your geometry, it will just select the joint, it won't select the geometry itself. So that's just something to keep in mind, but sometimes you will end up selecting geometry instead of the joint that you want to select. So in those cases, there are masking options here, right? These buttons up here. So all of these are blue right now, so that means I can select everything here, right? This is polygon, this is NURBS, curve, this is joints, all of these are selectable here. However, if I switch off this one here, which is for polygons, and then I try to select any geometry, it's not letting me select it, right? It's masked. So, you know, sometimes you can use that just to make sure that, you know, you don't select anything you don't want to select if you don't want to select the geometry. Right? Well, I'll just switch that back on for now. Okay. Or, in this case, I can just go to my outliner. And you see I have my joint chain here in the outliner, which is all under PendulumO1. If I hold on Shift and press this plus sign here, we see the whole hierarchy that I've made here. Alright, so I'm just going to hold on Shift here and select all of these joints here, right, in my outliner. And then I'm going to Control select the rope geo and the ball geo. And I'm going to go to Skin, Bind Skin option box. Alright, my bind to is selected joints. Bind method, closest distance. Actually, let me reset these settings. Right, okay. So, yeah, the default is hierarchy, so I need to change that to selected joints, closest distance. Everything else is fine. Alright. Drop off rate. We'll see that. I'll explain that in a little bit, right? But let's just bind it with these default settings here. So if I bind that now, alright, and I select a joint here and rotate it, we see, you know, the geometry is bound to the joints. Alright, and we see how the edges and vertices there are deforming when I rotate that joint. Alright, so pretty straightforward there. So I'm just gonna briefly touch on some skinning here, right, and skin weights. So to illustrate skin weights, I'm just going to turn off X-ray shading and select just the geometry. And if I right click on the geometry, right, you see now that my geometry is bound, right, I get all these options to go into sub-object mode, or I can choose Paint Skin Weights tool. Alright, and when I go into Paint Skin Weights tool, my tool comes up here, and we see all of the influences here, which are all the joints that have been bound to this mesh. Now actually, for this particular case here, I didn't necessarily need to bind this end joint here, right? Because if we look here, right, everything that's white, right, when I select the joint 1 here, the white area represents the influence of this joint, right? So when this joint rotates, it's more or less carrying along everything that is white, and you know, where it grays out into black is where its influence becomes less. Alright, so we can see the influence of the joint 2 that's starting off less here and then has most influence here and then tapers off into joint 3 here, the influence of joint 3 and joint 4. Right, so So we have a paint tool here that we can, paint weights with. So let's say if I wanted to smooth the transition, right, between the influence of this first joint here and the second joint here, I could actually paint smooth that influence in between there. Right now my brush size is pretty big, so I can press and hold B and drag to the left to decrease my brush size. So yeah, it's really huge apparently. So I'm just going to make it smaller. Right, so now we have to be careful when we're using this paint skin weights tool, because sometimes you may paint on one part of the geometry and you think you're painting, you're just dealing with two influences. You really want to smooth between two influences, but because all of the influences are unlocked, right? Let's say I want to smooth between 1 and 2 here. If I just start to paint smooth here, I might end up getting influence from 3 and 4. It's possible, right? So just to safeguard against that, right, I'm just going to see these icons here that are like open locks. I'm just going to click on them to make sure those two are locked. And now, right, so because I'm smoothing between 1 and 2, I'm just going to smooth this area here, as this is joint 1 and this is joint 2. So I'm just smoothing this area in between here. So I'm actually going to make my brush a bit smaller. And if I paint right in between here, you can see how I can paint, that influence and smooth it right in between. So I'm really I'm changing the fall off right between these joints here. Okay, so that may be what you want. You can spend a lot of time refining these things. I'm just going to undo that. And leave it at the default there. Alright. Okay, so I'm just going to zero out all my controls here. Sorry, all my joints. Zero this one and this one here. Alright, so now that the joints are bound to the mesh, I'm ready to start making some controls to control these joints here.